Okay, so I'm going to clarify one thing, is that I send out the ecs36 underscore homework3.json. And the thing is that I actually include the web report entry inside of the JSON. That means that everywhere that you need to basically, whenever you have a web report, you need to actually include all other functions, which is actually make things more complicated. So let me see, this is the program. Oh, okay, I'm here. So I will suggest you, I highly recommend you to do this instead of using that JSON, is that you actually separate it out into two different RPC specification JSON. So the number one is I included over there in the web report tarball. I included on Wednesday, is this one. Not this one, sorry. So this one is only have this web report, only one. And this is only used for interact with the web report server. Okay, and then you can just use the code in hw3client to actually build and initiate your communication with web report. And what you want to do also for the JSON, homework 3, and I will say, did I actually remove this? Okay, so the thing is, this is one function, get distance. The second function is conflict of interest and operator equal, and then get VSID. And the last one is a reporting JSON, and you should actually just get rid of this. If you get rid of this, you have two RPC. One is the RPC you will interact with each other, your client server, and the other one is interact with the web report. So you're going to generate using you're going to modify your makefile a little bit when you do this integration, and such that you will do this. But on the other hand, it's also okay if you want to put it back, which is in fact my first implementation. I actually have this already in there, and so it's just make it more complicated for the server side, because you're really talking to two different server. One is a web report server, one is hw3 server, and so I mean this is just for you to consider in your code, but this is up to you. You want to do my original one, that's fine. But if you want to separate, that's my recommendation. It will be cleaner. You will be much easier for you to debug the problem. Okay, any question with what I just said? And thank you for Saif asked that very important question. I have, it's all silence here.
So Professor
Frank, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that what is the 4 messages and why we need 4?
What are the 4 messages?
Yeah.
So when you when you actually make a call, it's a 4 JSON, but then this 4 JSON need to communicate with the web report server, which is each of them is 1 message. Therefore, you want to communicate 4 JSON. That's 4 message. So is that answer your question, or do I need to go in a little bit?
So do we create our own 4 JSON messages?
Well, you shouldn't need to, but you might need to, depending on how you write your code. Okay, so what I'm saying is each of the JSON is already there when you communicate doing the JSON RPC. In the JSON RPC, let me just use this JSON RPC protocol message. Let me actually pick it up. Just show you an example that the code I used earlier. Okay, So this is the, let me actually just do hw3 client. Maybe that's better. So I'm just using hw3 client, which is the code being generated, okay? And you look at the first function, that this function is called get distance, right? So look at this part of the code. This part of the code is the generator code to implement the virtual function get distance. And look at the get distance, that the important thing is this call method. So this is the call method is really being sent to the server corresponding to this hw3 client. And just look at this line, you have two JSON. The number one JSON is the P. P is a JSON, which is the JSON value P. And this part of the code is actually construct the JSON together, is putting each of the element into the JSON and deliver the JSON to the server side. So that is the JSON number one I was talking about. And then this JSON, after you process from the server side, it will return back to you, which is the result. And what's the result? It's also JSON value. That's second JSON. So from the client side, when you make a call, you already have a two JSON. One is you're going to send it over there. One is what you just received. So you need to report this JSON P to the web report server, and you need to report the result also as another separate message to the web report server. So the client side, you have a two. You can imagine on the server side, you also have a two. And that's the 4 JSON, and that's 4 messages. Is that clear to you, Fran?
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you.
Okay. I want to follow up on your question, just go a little bit more. You cannot modify hw3 client.h, by the way. You cannot, because this part of the code is actually inside the hw3 client.h, which you're not supposed to implement. And so that's why you actually don't have direct access to P and the result, right? But you can do that is that at the hw3 client.cpp, in fact, in this case, it will be shadow_flight.cpp. Inside the flight.cpp, they're going to call get distance. But when they call, they actually have all the information they're using to construct the JSON P. And therefore, what you need to do is that you have to do it inside your shadowfly.cpp over there, because you have all the argument, then doing exactly the same logic to produce that JSON. That's a bit trick I didn't tell you before, is that you're not supposed to modify the hw3 client.h, because when we grade your homework, we're going to reconstruct the hw3 client.h. And similarly, the result part is easier because the result will be returned to the client, to the shadowfly.cpp anyway. So the result is no problem, but the JSON you're going to send over there, you have to reconstruct, follow the JSON programming outside the hw3 client.h, okay? And that's the extra tips I would like to remind you. Okay, any other question for this part? For the web reporting and relationship to hw3?
Yeah, Professor. So I'm still confused about you said we should separate the JSON part. So does that mean we need to have two JSON documents?
You will have two, yes, you will have two RPC.json document. So in other words, if you do the way I suggest after we do the separation, so you're going to have one is this one. This file, this will only cover the 4 function that you have. The 4, which get distance, conflict of interest, operator equal, and get VSID. It will only have 4 entry in there. And then you're going to have another one, which is under web reporting, which is the ecs36b WR. Okay, for this one. And this one, you only have a 1 entry, which is web report. So an earlier version I sent out that you have a 4 plus 1 within the same configuration file. But I think it's better for you to separate. One has 4, one has 1. So you will generate 5. I mean, just for example, if you want to have a 5, then you won't have hw3server.h. You don't have hw3client.h because it's generated by this single single element RPC JSON. Okay, so instead, if you mix everything together, then you will have a bigger one which contain all the function. It might add some complexity when you try to communicate with a web server.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Professor, I had one question too. So if we, I mean, you suggest creating a separate JSON file, but if we want, then we can just put it on the same JSON file that you've given us, right?
Yes, you can do that. Yeah.
So do we have to make some extra function calls in like shadow flight or shadow person so that this web report is displayed on the output?
No, for web report, you will insert code into the shadowfly.cpp, but the web report itself doesn't know anything about like a fly object, transaction object, or a person object, because web report is very simple as picking up a JSON, adding your VSID, and then send it to the server. That's it. It has no semantic understanding about the content of the JSON. It's just treated as a string of JSON and then send it over there.
Okay, so we just need to add some code to the shadow flight .cpp.
Right. Essentially, you're adding code looks like this one, WR. That's why I gave you this code, and you should just write a code looks like this. It's just HTTP client. You create this, and then has a put in your JSON, and just say my client.web report over there.
Okay, so do we all, since we're adjusting the .cpp file, do we need to also adjust the .h file as well, or no?
The .h file for web report, no, you shouldn't modify the web report WR client.h. That file is automatically generated.
Oh, and I was talking about the shadow flight.h file.
No, shadowfly.h you don't need to change.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because you can see that over here, when I write this code, there is nothing. I mean, the only thing you need to do is that inside your shadowfly.cpp, you might want to add you need to add a line, which is include WR client.h. Because you're using the WR client, right? You need to include that. But the rest should be already there. Like the standard lib or the connector HTTP client, this should be already there.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Professor?
Yes.
For example, I have I want to report, let's say, the comparison between two shadow objects in the client. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do I need to take each so in this, for example, conditional statement, do I need to take each key value pair and then send it to the report for each object?
No, you don't need to do that. What you should be reporting, you shouldn't need to worry about which object you need to include it, but you should find a place where it's making a call. And then when you make that call, you have like a parameter you're passing to the call is going to be turned into the JSON. And then you're reporting that particular JSON.
And so my question is, one of the parameters, does it have to be initialized? So for example, it has a specific value and not it doesn't vary.
Sorry, I don't understand what. Let me actually just give you the example.
So for example, look at your code here. Let's say for the image URL, for example, for the my VSID. Let's say we have many objects here, and we have more than one VSIDs. So am I supposed to repeat this piece of code for each VSID and then give it its own value? Is this the way we should do it?
You're talking about, let's not mixing these two concepts. One is owner's VSID. Owner's VSID is go with the object and is irrelevant.
Oh.
But here is your student VSID, your VSID.
Yeah, I know that, Professor. I'm sorry if my question wasn't very clear. My question is, let's say I want to look at the, just hang on for a moment. I open my client program, okay, and then for let's say Shadowflight, I have an HTTP URL, right? And
okay.
The URL is a parameter in the JSON.
Right.
And so I have more than one Shadowflight. So do I need more than one my JSON keys and values for each HTTP URL parameter?
No, you shouldn't need to do that. You shouldn't need to do that. You're just writing code. Whenever you have a different flight, different shadow flight being called, at the time that function being called, you actually extract the information, whatever parameter pass into that call. So let me use this example to make sure that we're clear. So I was looking at hw3 client. Let me actually compare this two so you know what I'm talking about. Let's use get distance as an example, okay? So this part of the code is get distance, right? And the get distance you see is passing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 arguments. And this 6 argument is being put into the JSON, right? By this segment of code, and then you send it over there. And what I said earlier is that this P is representing the JSON we need to send it out. But I don't want you to modify the hw3 client because you cannot insert the web report here because otherwise you're going to modify. And therefore you're going to modify shadow. Let me actually pull out shadowfly.cpp. Okay, inside shadowfly CPP has get.
Oh, Professor, I get what you're saying.
Right.
Whenever you want to construct the shadow person or the shadow object, you take this the values of the, let's say VSI, the VSID, the name of that shadow person, and then you put it inside the argument. Oh, I see.
Right.
And because they're all strings.
Right. So it's an excellent question. I appreciate Saif. Is that? But I want to just explain a little bit in the code for others as well. I think you got it, but I just want to double check, make sure everybody got it here. This program is hw3 client. I have this piece of code here, right? This piece was constructed, but you can see that I actually have this call here. So this call is actually calling this one, right? This call is called this one. This is hw3 client, not web report client. This hw3 client is calling here. So what I'm saying is that piece of code should be replicated somewhat here. Should be replicated somewhat here so you can, for example, let me just do this one very quickly. So just one example, if I actually duplicate this piece of code and I put it here in the hw3, in the Shadowfly, this piece of code, then I will be able to construct the same JSON, right? So the action is going to be this string, right? So I will just do this. So action will be like this. So you actually put one by one, putting here, and now at the end of this, you actually have the same JSON. At this point, you have the same JSON as hw3client.h, as hw3client.h. Okay, and then very important, don't forget, you have to add my VSID, and then you put in your VSID. Okay, this part is very important. Don't forget about this because we need to see your VSID here. And then you can actually send it using not hw3 client, but using WR client. WR client is a client for web report, and using the code inside, similar to WR client.cpp, and send it to the server, WR server. But this server is actually need to be modified, send it to 102, I think it's 8300. Send it to that server, right? And that you can see that I'm actually be able to, number one, we reconstruct the JSON. And so anytime this function get called, this piece of code will be executed, you will do a reporting. Okay, and similarly, this part might be easier because now you got another one, which is my V, right? You got a my V, this is the result. So essentially what I'm saying is that my V is in fact number 4 JSON. Okay, the previous one is number 1, this is number 4, which is the result. Okay, here you're going to do this part again. You're going to do this part of the code again. Okay, you're going to do web client web report, but this time you're reporting a different JSON. So the one here you're reporting P, JSON P. But here you're reporting JSON my V. Okay, so then before you make the call, you send one. After the call, you send another one. Now you have a 2 JSON being reported to web report server. Okay, so I hope this kind of clarified a bit about how you can integrate your code from the web report into your hw3 client server and another. Any question from anybody on this issue? Okay, I'm going to stop recording here, and so this will be a video by itself, and then we'll continue the class with other thing.